earth that will die without our taking care. And so and if I think about the students that go to this school that I have in class, many of them are middle class, and a number of them really live on the edge of poverty and have no safety nets. And so either we move into a new age or we continue the systems that enslave our world and that leave us irreverent. So the question then for me is, if we are willing to buy into a new spirituality of the earth and of human solidarity, then we have to ask ourselves, how, with whom, and with what are we in solidarity?
I'd like to respond as well to the query, to the question whether religion in general and Christianity in particular have any kind of particular role to play. And I think, excuse me, I think that there is an important role, if only because, as a matter of historical fact, if you will, Christianity has been the religion of the West, and it is in the West, not by any means the only religion, but the dominant religion in the West. And it's in the West that, if you will, the story that was laid out by Dennis in recent centuries has really played out to the most extreme degree. That is to say, this illusion of separation from the earth and from all of the creatures of the earth. And then secondly, the sense that the earth is no longer sacred. And by earth, I don't mean just the solid earth, as we say in geology, but the fluid earth, that's to say the atmosphere, and the hydrosphere, or the oceans, the lakes, the rivers, the streams, and the groundwater of the earth. And so since that, in a way, pathological attitude about our surroundings really began in the context of the West primarily, it's not strictly in the West, but, and at the same time we are Christians, at least many of us in name, that connection, it's almost as if we have a special responsibility to take corrective action at that level of our, what we have learned and also what we have taught to be the case about creation within our recent Western tradition. I think what we've heard today makes it very clear that if we go deep enough into the roots of Catholic teaching and back to the earliest patristic writings, the early fathers, it's very clear that this was certainly not the case in the first centuries, that humanity was seen as separate, or that, for that matter, creation was seen as something alien to God, a place where you would not go to learn of the Spirit, if you will. So in that sense, if only to correct what's gone on in the last several centuries, Christians have a responsibility. And in a bigger sense, I think also that we are recovering now, I think also in the West, a new awareness because of the depth of the alienation from nature, this sense of deep hunger to connect with the Spirit present in not only vertically, if you will, with a God that is up there, but God who is present in others, other people, obviously, also other creatures, and throughout the network of creation. And for this, science has some value, but I was interested to hear what Dennis said about, we have an appreciation maybe that Teilhard de Chardin, that great Jesuit scientist, did not have about the limitations of science. And as a scientist, I'm very acutely aware of those. In a way, science, particularly the science of ecology, and evolutionary biology of the last 100 years has really brought to the fore much of what, for example, Thomas Berry has had as new insights. But on the other hand, there is a real limitation in approaching all of this stuff strictly on a conceptual level, and that's why I really appreciate the spiritual dimension that you have brought forward through your invoking of the early sources, many of which are not well known, I don't think, to Christians, let alone to others who would not call themselves Christians. So I'm very grateful for your presentation today for all those reasons.
I also am very grateful for your presentation, and early on in the presentation you said something like, and I pose it as a question, do I live on the earth or do I live in the earth? And I was reminded of a story which I'm going to tell, and some of you might know the story. It's called The Woman Who Lived on the Side of the Mountain. But this is Sister Yvette's rendition, so if you've read it elsewhere, there might be some changes in the story. And that's what storytelling is about. And every story begins by once upon a time. So once upon a time, there were some people who were living on the side of a mountain. And this mountain had been deforested. It was very devoid of trees. There were no flowers. It was not a very pleasant place to live. In the wintertime, the wind was so horrific that the parents were very careful with the children about sending them outside. They also would tell them, be very careful on the mountain. It's very dry. Watch out when you're on the path. You can slip, you can fall, you can really hurt yourself. But as children would be children, they would still go out on the side of the mountain and go down the path and play. And every day they would meet this old woman. And as children are children, they would make fun of this old woman. And they would call her names. And they thought they would refer to her as the crazy old woman on the path. And she always carried this sack. And they thought it was kind of just a dirty old sack, and they didn't even know what was in it. So a lot of these children who went to the school down off the mountain in the village grew up and actually moved away from their own village. Years after, when this woman was an adult, she really wanted her now grown children and her husband to know what the village was like that she had grown up in. So she goes back to the place, and she looks up and she thinks, I've forgotten how to get here. She was facing a beautiful, beautiful mountainside with trees and meadows of flowers, and the children was playing and everyone was talking to one another. And so she recognized a man there, and she said to him, do you remember me? We'll call her Eileen. And so Eileen says to Mike, do you remember me? And Mike said, oh yes, I remember. We used to play on the side of the mountain. And she said, but I don't recognize this place. What on earth happened? And Mike said, do you remember that old lady that we used to see on the side of the mountain? Well, actually, what she was doing is every day she would go out with a sack of seeds. And each day she would plant some seeds. You can imagine the rest of the story. And so I guess the end for me is the old lady knew what it was like to live in her earth. And so my question is, because we look at all of these questions, whether they're questions of poverty or war or ecology or environment, as sometimes overwhelming and too big for us. And so the woman has become kind of a mentor for me, this old lady, in terms of all I have to do is look at what's around me and step into it and not just on it.
What I really like about the story, well, two things. One is it's a woman, and I want to say that's one of the. I'm very conscious in my presentation. I didn't have the voices of women there, and it wasn't deliberate. In my longer talk, I include Hildegard and do a lot of work with Hildegard, and she's got some great writings on the environment and images for the environment. And I'll tell you one of those